Hi there, everybody. This is Heather with the Friends of Paige Walker, and been hiking around a lot, exploring this cemetery, looking for the best places to show you the most frightening stories. And so I wanted to start in this area of the cemetery because this is one of the older portions of the cemetery. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this around. So Hillcrest Cemetery, this is one of Cary's main historic cemeteries, and a lot of people don't even realize that this cemetery is out here, but it holds some of Cary's most prominent citizens from dating back to when Cary was back in the good old days. I wanted to start in this section of the cemetery because you can really see the ivy creeping along the ground. Now, this is just outside the cemetery gates, so this area isn't visited quite as much, but I think it's beautiful. You got the creeping ivy. And this singular grave out here beyond the walls. If you go down this trail, there's actually a secret down there. I've been down there from the other direction on Kildare Farms Road, and that's actually where the remains of an old Cary church used to stand. And if you hike down there, you'll be able to see some pieces of those remains. The Cary First Christian Church. So this right here, if you've seen pictures of Hillcrest, this is what you will have mostly seen. Very iconic, idyllic part of Hillcrest. And what I want to do today is show you some of the most beautiful, but also some of the most eerie parts of this cemetery. Cary actually has an immense amount of history that many people are not aware of. And in fact, quite a few scary ghost stories. In fact, among those stories, we have a legend of buried treasure off of High House Road, haunted woods, where back in the 1800s and early 1900s, people would disappear, going missing for days, and then come back described as if possessed. We also have the spirit of a phantom horse that wanders the streets of downtown that dates back to the Civil War, and we're going to tell all those stories. This archway, which is very well known, if you come to Hillcrest, this is probably the first place you're going to look. We actually don't know much about these graves. We're not exactly sure who this family is. We do know that this archway is a portal between the two families. So we have the Jones over here. You can see their prominent, very picturesque grave. And then if you come over here, you will see their neighbors, the Smith family. Now I'm going to come out and I'm going to show you some of the spookiest graves available. Now, I hope you're at home right now and that you've set the stage for yourself. I hope you've turned off the lights, lit a candle, and are prepared for some of these stories. A lot of history tours and haunted tours had to be canceled this year, but we wanted to still bring you to a cemetery. So, right here in this section, these are some of the oldest graves from some of the prominent members of Cary that date back the furthest. We see here we got this person was born in 1851, 1909. We even have some headstones which are broken. Now there is a legend in this part of Cary, specifically in this part of the cemetery, of a farmer. Now, when I was told about the ghost of a farmer being out here, I was actually shocked because I have several friends who work in paranormal investigation. And a friend of mine, Keith Campbell, who runs Wake Paranormal Investigation, he told me he came out here and he used an EVP device and a spirit box, and the word farmer kept popping up. And he didn't understand why, but anytime an EVP gives you a word, it's very meaningful. I've had a spirit box, a word come over it, someone saying, hello? So anytime you hear anything, it might be hard to determine what it is. But the word farmer popped up. Well, we found out later that there's actually a legend that a ghost of a farmer stands by the largest tree in the cemetery, and he's been spotted during services, burial services. You'll actually see him standing alongside the tree, watching as people, citizens of Cary, are buried here. Now this is what I believe is the largest tree. It's very beautiful. It definitely has a feeling to it. And so, given that that story, that legend has been passed down for a long time, and then that totally unaware of that legend, a paranormal investigator actually saw the word farmer pop up. It was just a little bit too much to be coincidental. So supposedly if you come out here at night, or if you come out here during a cemetery service, you might actually see a gentleman farmer standing quietly against a tree. I have come out here before, and there was a groundskeeper out here, and I actually look back on that and I wonder if the groundskeeper was actually this farmer who's known to wander here and watch people be buried and help keep up the graveyard. Now here's a tragic story. If you've lived in Cary a while, you might know of Dr. Templeton. Here's his headstone. He was born in 1855, died in 1932. He was one of the Cary doctors. If you lived in Cary, the Pentagram, I saw that too. I noticed that and I thought that that was very strange. And the Pentagram, I believe that this is the Order of the Eastern Star, maybe? So I don't think this is actually a pentagram, but that definitely caught my eye as well, right here in a cemetery in Cary, where I wouldn't expect to see it. But Dr. Templeton, he was the doctor. Now Cary was a very small town. Cary is already pretty small, but back then it was much smaller. And he was the doctor you would go see, Dr. Templeton. Anyone who lived here knows who Dr. Templeton is. If you know who he is, say in the comments that you know who we're talking about. There's a picture of him that's actually on the mural that shows the history of Cary. You'll see a picture of Dr. Templeton, very well-known doctor. Ooh, the tree is like throwing acorns at me. Well, sadly, he had a 5-year-old son, Rufus. Now you can see Rufus, born 1903, died in 1908. At 5 years old, Rufus was by the fireplace, or by the, I believe by the heater. So think 1900s, the heater would be actually lit with fire. And he caught on fire, and his burns were so bad that he tragically was horrifically burned, that his father, a doctor, the doctor, tried to care for him. I know it could be angry spirits throwing things at me. I wouldn't be shocked. This is the largest tree. There is a lot of energy around this tree, which actually stands over the Templeton graves. But anyways, his 5-year-old son was playing by the fire and unfortunately caught fire. His father did try to save him, but after several days of suffering, he passed away. Very tragic death of Rufus Templeton here. And again, they're buried right underneath this tree where there's a lot of spirits, farmers, and now there's this tragic death here. So clearly this part of the graveyard, which is one of the oldest parts of the graveyard, has a lot of eerie stories behind it. Now we're going to go take a look. This is quite an interesting Cary story right here. I didn't realize this myself, and we have historian here to share the legend, which is amusing and spooky. Tell us about this grave here.
Greetings. Here lies Alfred Daniel Jones. He was known as Buck to those who loved him dearly, and there were many who did. This is a tale of great accomplishment, kindness, and tragedy. Buck was Cary's favorite son back in the late 1800s. He was very kind and generous to all. He actually provided the land and a log cabin to be one of the first public schools for Cary's African American children. He was a lawyer, and like his grandfather, Nathaniel Jones of White Plains, he was active in politics. He was Cary's first diplomat, and he was appointed by President Grover Cleveland to be the U.S. Consul General to Shanghai. But sadly, shortly after he arrived in Shanghai, he became very ill with malaria and had to go home and died on the voyage back. Now, we have two accounts.
I'll let you hold this and show it to people.
Oh, okay. We have two accounts of Buck's death. One from the newspapers that reported that Buck became violent and dangerous shortly after boarding the ship, had to be manacled in his cabin after a fight in which he became injured and disfigured. And he raved on incessantly for 7 days in his cabin before death finally ended his sufferings. The other account we had was from Washington officials who told that Buck was so weak when he boarded the ship, he had to be carried on board, went to bed, and never left until death arrived. So who do we believe? The media or Washington, D.C.? And some things never change as the centuries go by, do they? When Buck's body was brought back to Cary by train, his casket was carried up to his mother's front door, and about halfway up the walkway, she came out sobbing, laid her hands on the casket, and told that it was always her habit to meet him halfway whenever he came home, and she wanted to meet him one last time on his final trip home. So it's very sad. Over 1,500 people attended Buck's funeral. That was more than 3 times the number of people that were living in Cary at the time. This was in 1893. People came from near and far to pay their respects to this beloved man, including the very poor and some African American families who, with tears running down their cheeks, told of what a good friend he had been to them. And Buck Jones will long be remembered by his name, for if you travel the crossroads between western Raleigh and eastern Cary, you very likely travel on a road that bears his name. And now you know the story of the man for whom Buck Jones Road is named. Remember him and honor him by being kind to others and a good friend to all. Here we go.
Thank you for that piece of history. So yes, I would never have known walking by here that this was the grave for Buck Jones. And what was his name again?
Alfred Daniel Jones, yes, but he's known as Buck.
How did he get the name Buck?
You know, I'm not sure. I don't know. How does anybody get their nickname? I don't know. That's a good question.
It's interesting. The road is named after his nickname rather than his actual name.
Yes.
Very telling.
Yes. Alfred was actually a family name, and he had an uncle named Alfred, so maybe they called him Buck to distinguish him from his uncle Alfred.
That could be.
Yeah.
So there is the story of Buck Jones. We actually have some mystery graves here as well. I did want to point these out to you. There are several people buried here that we do not know who's buried here because, well, look at this grave. Look at this headstone. There is absolutely nothing written on it. It's just a stone. I wonder if there was originally something written and if time has worn it away, or perhaps if the family who buried someone here never had the money to actually turn it into actually have it engraved with their name on it. I'm not sure, but we have several of those around the cemetery here. And if I see them, I'll try to point them out to you. People who we do not know who is buried there. So as we're crossing into this part of the cemetery, we also see some famous names here. Buck Jones should be a familiar name. We have the Yates family. For those of you who's been to Yates Mill, that name should sound very familiar. They are buried here as well. And we are heading towards one of the stories that I personally find to be, just one of the saddest and most tragic. Now, her headstone is noticeable from across the cemetery. If you ever walk here, there's just no way to miss this bust of a little girl captured in time at the age which she died. And we have a mourner here here to tell us her story. And again, if you have trouble hearing, just let us know and I'll move closer.
This is the grave plots of the Yarborough family, and this is the grave marker of Mary Ray Yarborough. And it's truly a very, very sad tale, because she was a beautiful little girl and she adored her father. She called him her Daddy Blue Eyes, and she was the apple of his eye, and he adored her. And she was one of his greatest loves, in addition to his practice and to his patients. He was so dedicated to his patients and to his family. But the real tragedy of this little girl, who was born on July 1st, 1926, was she contracted meningitis. And as renowned and as fine a physician as her father was, he was unable to save Mary Kay. And Mary Kay perished. She was taken to Duke Hospital, where she languished for 11 days, and then passed away on March 7th.
Here, I'm gonna let you hold it so they can hear you better.
Mary Kay walked the streets of Cary, and she played when it was still a dirt road. Her father's office was on Academy Street, and it still stands, as well as the house. It's next to the very famous Pink Victorian, the Guest Ogle House. And Mary Kay was named after her mother, Mary, and her middle name, Ray, is from her father, Frank Ray Yarborough. The tragedy of Mary Kay's death, despite the fact that her father was such an excellent physician, was not only did her parents grieve, but it caused great anguish and hardship in their marriage, to where it almost came apart. That is the very sad story, but also Dr. Yarborough was not happy with the bust of his daughter for her tomb, and it was sent back several times until he felt it was a perfect replica of his little daughter, as close as one can come. So for 80 years, these magnificent oaks have kept sentinel over the grave of this little girl who gazes out on Hillcrest, which looked far different today, or looks far different today than it did at the turn of the century.
I imagine so. Thank you for your story, mourner.
My pleasure.
I've seen her wandering these grounds before. She seems to spend a lot of time in this cemetery. I think she knows quite a lot about it. I wonder who is buried here that she's here grieving. I did want to show you a very good close-up. Apparently, I have heard she once had blue marbles in her eyes, which might go along with her calling her father Daddy Blue Eyes. It must have run in their family, but those have worn away. This is, I see someone asking if it will be recorded. This is recorded, so we will actually upload this to our YouTube later so that you'll be able to see it. When you walk past this tomb here, this grave, you really are seeing a face captured in time of a young girl who died too early of meningitis, and her own father, a doctor, again, one of the Cary doctors, Dr. Yarborough and Dr. Templeton, were very well known, and both of them tragically lost children way too young. Now, when we talk about the trees here and which one the farmer would stand by, I've thought that it's probably that one over there. But these are also very big, so I would love, if you guys are watching this, tell me what you think. Which is the biggest tree? That's a very large tree as well. Can we put a photo of her stone online? Yes, feel free to ask questions, by the way. I'm happy to answer questions for you. There is a photo of her stone online. If you follow Friends of Paige Walker on Facebook, we have her entire story and her picture on our Facebook. Now this stone has quite a mystery behind it, and it looks like there's someone here to talk about it, actually.
I appreciate you stopping by. You've arrived at stone of a local hero. Balcom is the name. I can tell you a little bit about myself. I was born in Apex in 1880. Joined the military, served my country, volunteered at 18 in the Spanish-American War, and actually returned again at age 38 in World War I. Unfortunately, had some injuries in the war. Hearing and vision went, and I took my life.
Why don't you show them? You can hold it and show them yourself so that you can show them what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Took my own life in 1924, left behind a wife, buried next to me here, Patty. And then I have 5 children buried here as well. Left them in Cary. Now, as you can see, big marker here. I can tell you a little bit about what they mean. At the top, I mentioned my military service. So as you can see, again,
they're having trouble hearing you.
Oh, in both the Spanish American and again a World War I veteran as well. The oval on the left there was once where my family had put a portrait of myself there. On the right, you can see a symbol for the Mason, and then on the bottom is a symbol of the Scottish Rite. I was actually a railroadman for most of my career. So a man of service to country, of community, and family man.
His tale is extremely tragic. Thank you for being willing to share your story. What I've been starting to do is handing these to the tour guides so that you guys can hear them better. So I will try to do that so that these ghosts whose voices are starting to get quiet with the ages of being long gone might be able to hold my phone, and I'm sure they wonder what it is, but they can tell their stories. This is the mystery, by the way. When I spoke of the mystery of the stone here, this is, historians were baffled over what this was for quite a long time. We thought that this was, well, tell me what you think that is. If you were to look at that, what would you think that this person is holding? So to us, it looked like a grenade, and we couldn't quite figure out why there was a dismembered arm holding a grenade, pulling the pin out. But it turns out that this is representative of his service in the railroad. For those of you who had trouble hearing the beginning, this was a hero. He was a veteran. When he was 18, yeah, it does. It looks like a grenade. But it turns out it is a railroad tie and a lantern, by the way. A railroad tie and a lantern. But he was a hero when he was only 18. He served in the Spanish-American War, and then when he was 38, he enlisted in World War I. Unfortunately, the gas impacted him, and I would be willing to guess PTSD impacted him as well. And unfortunately, even though he was married and he had 5 children, he was never able to get over the ghosts of his past, and unfortunately took his own life early in life. As far as if the elementary school is named after him, I'm not certain. I would imagine so, though. A lot of these people here are prominent members of Cary, so if the names sound familiar, they probably are. There's the name Dry over there. I've seen a Dry Road in downtown. There's many, many popular names here. Now, I do have a gravestone over here. That's Joanne, that's right, Scottish Railroad. That's what he worked on too. Now this is the gravestone of Dorothy May Neville. And oh, well, I thought I was going to tell you this story, but it looks like we might have someone here to talk about it herself. Tell us a little bit about the grave here and the story behind it.
Well, it all happened so quickly. I never had a chance to say goodbye to my family, my friends, or even finish high school. Whatever I said to Miriam and my other friends sitting with me that day would be my last words on this earth.
Show them. Why don't you show them by holding onto it if you can? This is a cell phone.
January 26th, 1950 was a beautiful, bright, and sunny day. Even Principal Cooper was standing outside with us to enjoy some of the beautiful lunch hour until a strong breeze blew, snapping the cable wire that held the stars and stripes atop the flagpole. It went sailing through the sky and caught on to a nearby power line. The other end struck me, sending 12,000 volts through my body. Imagine, I was electrocuted in front of everyone I knew, my school, my friends, and even my principal. The local doctor, Dr. Hunter, from across the street, came running over, but he already knew I was probably dead before I hit the ground. My best friend Miriam, standing next to me, also got struck with the wire, but suffered no permanent electrical shock. However, I have no doubt that she was emotionally changed from this experience. Even Principal Cooper, who took the dangerous risk of pulling the wire off me, suffered no electrical shock. Only me. I was the only fatality of this event that could have been avoided. You see, the power lines that ran in front of the school were weathered and frayed. It was an accident waiting to happen. And because of this, my parents sued the power company. But in the end, the heartbreak was just too much, and they moved away. But I'm still here, a lasting symbol of all the lives lost too soon, and a quiet reminder to all those left behind to do better.
Tragic. And how old were you when this happened?
I was a sophomore in high school.
You had so many things to look forward to. Thank you for sharing your story with us, and you've looked beautiful for all these years, apparently. That is many, many tragic stories buried here. Every cemetery has tragedy, of course, but there are so many young ones buried here. Children of doctors, children who attended Cary High. So many stories here of lives cut short, and that is probably why the cemetery has as many haunted legends behind it as it does. Now, as we're walking, she was a sophomore in high school, Jamala. So I think she was 17, but it's possible that she was 15. High school worked differently back then. So I wanted to tell you, as I'm walking back and showing you some of these other graves, one of Cary's most prominent and creepy legends, definitely my favorite. It's the ghost of the High House. 17, thank you. Thank you, mathematicians. So, if you've driven down High House Road, and I'm sure if you live in Cary, you certainly have. What an interesting grave here. I don't know the story behind this, but I just wanted to look at it. I'm going to kind of wander and tell you these tales. So if you've driven down High House Road, you certainly know about the name High House, but you may not realize that High House is actually named after an actual house that once stood on that road. So the High House earned its name because it stood on the top of a tall hill, and it was a 2-story tall house, which back then would have been very tall. You can recognize there's another road name here, Maynard. And here's a sad tombstone. These are the tombstones we don't know the stories behind, but you can tell this one is just tragic. So according to primary documents, primary sources about Cary history, the High House had woods around it. Now understand that at the time, Cary was, it's still pretty small today, but it's grown so much. At the time, Cary would have been mostly woods. Trees like this growing everywhere. And the High House, there's a picture of it on our Facebook if you want to take a look at how it looked. It definitely looked eerie. Looks like it has a ghost story behind it. The story of the High House goes that people who lived there, specifically women, young women, would go wander in the woods and then get lost. And there would be search parties searching for these young girls, really, probably teens or early 20s. And they would get lost for days. And when they found them, they were described as being as if possessed or having gone insane. As if something out there drove their minds away from them. The High House itself, here's another unmarked grave, I believe. Don't they look eerie? When there's no names on them, I feel like it's extra sad. The High House also had a legend of buried treasure. Now, when I first heard that Cary had a legend of buried treasure behind it, I was completely floored. But the buried treasure is beneath where the High House once stood. And it goes like this. The person who lived there, their name was Leander. I think Leander Williams woke up from a dream. And in the dream, Leander found that there was treasure hidden beneath their fireplace. But when Leander woke up and went to search the fireplace, it had actually already been disturbed, as if someone had been in the house and dug up whatever was in the fireplace. That's particularly unusual because, I mean, this is just a dream. And yet after this dream, the ground there was actually disturbed. When the high house was torn down, all that was left around it are woods, and then eventually it was developed. But for a long time, the legend goes, the chimney could still be seen. You could see the chimney in the woods, rotting, falling apart, and that beneath that chimney, there might be the buried treasure that was dreamed about or stolen. And the woods around that area have their own haunted stories to tell. So I actually went walking there the other day, and there's a greenway that goes right through those woods now. So if you're feeling brave, you can walk through the woods. The other thing is the cemetery of that family was long lost. And historians have been searching for it for a long time to see if, well, one, to find it, but two, to see if there's any truth to the legend of buried treasure. Here's a row of graves you might not ever see out here in the woods. There's one other story, the location of the high house. I'm going to flip this around. Yes, so tell us, a little warm out for fall, right? Got a glow. Yeah, so for a long time, historians thought that the location of the high house would be in the Publix parking lot. So, I mean, I've been out there myself to the Publix parking lot, looking around. It does sound like the pool ghost story, doesn't it? It's amazing that Cary, completely separate from Raleigh, has very similar types of stories that have originated from happenings. And all of these are based in history. That's worth knowing that all of the stories we told you today are based in history. None of them are just completely made up legends. I'm going to show you some more graves. Yeah, so Publix is where we thought it was, but now we believe that the high house would have stood right where the greenway goes through the woods at, I believe it's the crossroads of High House and maybe Maynard. And then there's a greenway there, and if you walk down that greenway, well, here we go. Friends of Page Walker is answering. Near the intersection of High House and Maynard. So if you are looking for something to do to get a little spooked, you can walk down that greenway and remember this story that that those used to be woods where people would disappear and then come back with their minds lost, and that there's weird dreams that have gone around in that area and missing treasure somewhere. This is sad. Look at this. Here's a little headstone that's completely fallen over. I wonder about the story behind this one. So as you wander through here, there's so many stories that you can't possibly know them all, but I hope that our tour guides and historians and storytellers have shared with you at least some of the stories, so that if you come visit this cemetery and walk around, maybe come out here and look for the farmer, or look for the woman who's grieving and wandering. You can find some of these graves and know the story behind them. Now, as we're running short on time, I just wanted to show you this little gated section here. More pieces of the cemetery. There's so much to see out here. Now, there's one more story that we have shared on our Facebook that's one of my favorites as well. I love the high house story, and I love the story of the phantom horse. So I'm going to try to make it a quick story, but the story of the phantom horse goes that, so if you're ever driving down Academy Street in downtown, or the Ambassador Loop, which goes around Page Walker Hotel, that used to be, part of the railroad, and it was a hotel where people stayed. And back in the 1860s, it was actually captured by Union troops. Now, Cary's citizens, Cary would have been so small, but Cary would have been looking at these Union forces marching in, taking over what was really one of their most prominent citizens in one of their most prominent locations had been completely taken over by troops. They probably were scared because next door in Morrisville, there had been a pretty bloody battle recently. And next door, the other direction in Raleigh, they actually had a wall that they built around their entire city. So downtown Raleigh, there's a ghostly helicopter going by. So downtown Raleigh, sorry, I want to make sure you can hear me with this helicopter. It's probably a ghost. Let's look at it. Downtown Raleigh had a wall around it. So Cary was small and it was feeling very vulnerable, and it was taken over by these troops. And the Union forces rested there for a while, and they used it as a hospital, which was pretty standard for the era. If troops marched through, they would want to have a hospital for their injured troops to stay in. And when they packed up in the end, unfortunately, one of their soldiers, the youngest soldier, died in the night. So in the morning when they packed up to leave, they would have still gathered his horse and tried to take his horse with them. But when they went out there, even though he had died by the troops, the home was taken over by the troops. Thank you, Chris. So the home was taken over by the troops, not the hotel. But still, one of the most prominent citizens, prominent homes. And in the morning, when they went to gather his horse to take his horse home without his soldier riding him, the horse was actually missing. And they never were able to find the horse. Now again, understand that Cary during this time period would have been woods everywhere. So it'd be very easy for that horse to get lost and wander off in the woods, and they never find it. Decades later, a stable boy was cleaning out the stables, and he told the story of while he was out there working, all of a sudden the horses in the stables started to just go crazy. They started to stamp their feet and whinny and snort. And then he heard the sound of footsteps, hoof steps, galloping past on the dirt road outside, which would have become Ambassador Loop and Academy Street. Now, this incident repeated itself multiple times, and he told the story many times about this horse that sometimes he'd just be out there cleaning the stables and he would hear a horse gallop by, and it always upset all the horses in the stables. And again, it would be very creepy, not just because there's a horse going by, but because you're in the middle of the woods out there. So this legend of this phantom steed was passed down throughout Cary history. So if you ever go spend time near the Page Walker Hotel, Ambassador Loop Town Hall, or even the railroad tracks, especially if you go there at night, the legend says, maybe you're coming home from Bond Brothers Bar or Brewery, the legend says that you will hear hoofbeats of a phantom steed galloping around downtown Cary. That dates back to the 1800s. So that is the end. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm gonna come show you our team of spirits who rose from the dead just to help us. And I'm gonna aim a different way because the sun's coming this way and I want them to be able to see you. So these were our storytellers. Mark, Cary was named for
Samuel Fenton Cary.
Samuel Fenton Cary. He
Prohibitionist from Ohio.
Yes, so Samuel Fenton Cary was a prohibitionist. We always laugh that it's kind of ironic that Cary was named after a prohibitionist, but now a lot of downtown is from the north. But now downtown Cary is a lot of breweries. So here are our tour guides, spirits, historians. Yes, these are part of the Friends of Page Walker and other volunteers who came to help out. I'm going to join in. So if you guys have questions, please feel free to ask. Oh, I am sweating. Please feel free to follow us on Facebook. We are going to do tours like this, not this elaborate, but every single month. We will explore a new piece of Cary history, and we will take you there live. So follow Friends of Page Walker on Facebook. Every single month, we will explore a place like this, take you there firsthand in a live stream, and we go to all kinds of places that have either been forgotten or that the history isn't well known. We have so many cool places lined up to visit, so please follow us, and thank you so much. If you have any ideas of something you'd like to see us explore, send us a message, let us know. We're happy to explore more history and different history. And we actually have a really big surprise coming up that I can't reveal yet, but you will be excited by what's coming up next month. So please, please follow us. I think you're really going to like what we have, and I just can't say yet. But anyways, thank you for watching. We appreciate it, everybody. Share this if you had fun. Share it and let other people see the tour. And we will see you next month for more exploring lost pieces of history in Cary. Bye, everybody.